Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what we're working with today is we're working in lesson 4. And lesson 4 is basically about importing a background and doing some sort of animation things on it, adding shape layers. So we're going to create custom shapes, and those custom shapes are going to be the stars. We're going to customize a shape's fill and stroke. So they're going to, you've got here's a star here that's going to modify, right? So you've got the little red part around it. Use path operations to transform shapes as this goes in. For instance, here's the final. You'll see that the star turns into a flower and eventually plants itself. So that's our transform shape. We're going to animate our shapes, which we show, and snap layers into alignment, right? And use create nulls from past panel. Now, this background back here, you'll notice what's going on in the background has different colors, it moves, and all that background layer has been created for us. And if you'll notice, the background, the shape on that layer looks like it's moving behind the pot. So I would say that the shape is on the background layer and the pot is on the further layer forward, but we're going to play around with that. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to start a new composition. So here's our, okay. So here's our new composition. Okay, let me continue with known issues, right? And then from here, I want to do a file, and I want to import, right? Import. And I'm going to import a file. Now, what I'm going to import is I'm going to import the file called background, and I'm going to create a composition about background. So create file, composition, background. So I'm going to import that. So you'll notice automatically I have a composition in the background, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm on the 0th layer of the composition itself, okay? And then I'm going to insert a star. The way I insert a star is up here I have my rectangle tool, right? If I click on this, hit my shift key, kind of go over it, I should be able to get a... So all I did to get the collapsed items here is I just clicked and I held it down, and then allows me to choose the different options. I'm going to choose the star tool. So we're going to insert a star. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose Edit Preferences General. So I want to choose Edit, and I want to choose my preferences, and I want to choose General. And I'm going to get a dialog box at some point. Come on, there we go. And then I want to choose the center anchor point in new shape layer. So I want to make sure that center anchor point in new shape layer. So general and interesting. So I make sure that center anchor point in new shape layers, this item right here, is chosen. It says the anchor point is a reference After Effects uses when it changes a layer's position, scale, or rotation. By default, the shape's layer's anchor point is at the center of the composition. Selecting center anchor point in the new shape layer positions the anchor point in the center of the first shape that you draw in the layer. So, for instance, when we go to create the star, right? So I'm going to go ahead and drag the star. Okay, it took a interesting little bit, and I think what happened was is every time I was adding on a star, it started to create it looked like a filter for this, and it never added an extra shape layer. What I ended up having to do is I clicked on background, and then I inserted a shape layer. So I'm going to edit and undo the new star, right? And then this the way I had it. I made sure that background selected. I'm on the background section. And then I come along here and I drew the star. Now you'll notice when I draw the star, right, it automatically has the shape layer over here, okay? And then I can move around the star if I had to, right? So I move around the star and put it over here. Now I had done this a few times and it had added it as a brand new composition for some odd reason. So I would say duplicate this as best as possible, background, and then when you add the shape, the star layer over here. Okay, now what I did is I moved the microphone away from my face so it didn't make that popping noise as much, I hope. The next thing I did is I chose my pointer. I chose this pointer here, and then I clicked on the star. Then I was able to click on the fill section right here. So I'm going to choose fill, and I'm going to choose yellow. So there's my yellow. Right, there's my yellow there. And stroke being the outside. We talked about this before. I chose my stroke, and then I chose the red up here. I choose red, and then I push OK. So now I've got the yellow and red star. What I'm now working on is I'm doing a self-animation. Essentially, I'm going to add an animate preset to this particular star. So I want to open up the star panel, right? So here's my star drop-down arrow. And then over here I have the add. I choose the add, and I should see wiggle paths, which I truly enjoy the name of that. It makes me giggle. So I choose wiggle paths that make me giggle, right? And that gives me some criteria for the wiggle paths. Now, obviously, at this point, the wiggle paths are too wiggly, for lack of a better term. Jaggedy is the term they use, but like wiggly. Anyway, so far too wiggly, I'm going to have to smooth this out to make it a little bit easier to deal with. Okay, so working on the concept of the anti-wiggle, because that's what I'm going to call it, as we hit our down drop arrow for our star 1 layer, and then I'm going to choose the wiggle paths layer. So I go to my wiggle paths layer. Just want to say that again, wiggle paths. And I hit the down drop arrow. I have two options, the size and the detail. So I'm going to choose, well, there's many options, but I'm going to choose size at 2.0 and detail at 3.0. And what that does is that changes the outside of the star so it's not so wiggly. And it's still, you'll notice I still have a animation to it, right? So it has a little bit of a twinkle, but it's not quite as extreme wiggly as it was before. Now, what we continue to do is we access the highly scientific wiggles per second. We change it to 5, and then we change our blur, and we increase our blur, or we make sure the blur effect is placed there. So our blur option is chosen, and wiggles per second, highly scientific value at 5.0. All right, so now what we're going to do is with the star layer selected, we're going to click O to show the opacity value. And then what we're going to do at the very beginning, make sure it's at the home, the home or the very first frame. We want to choose our stopwatch because we're going to add a keyframe there, and we're going to make sure that the opacity is 100% at the very middle, right? It's 100%. There we go. Then what we're going to do is we're going to advance to about 215, which is roughly right about here, okay? And then we're going to change the opacity to 0. We're going to change the opacity to 0. So what's happening is between the beginning layer, or the beginning point, which is 2, and the opacity layer, which is right about 215, we're changing the opacity so it's going to gradually move for 100, where you can see it, all the way to 0, where you can't see it. Now, if you recall in our final version, where our star goes behind our pot, right? That's what's going on right here. That's what I'm creating. I'm creating that illusion that it's going to go beyond the pot and then grow into a flower. So we're going to have it create. And remember, it moves from this and then slowly moves into a flower. Right? So let's continue. All right, so what I went ahead and did is I clicked on the star, right? And then I chose edit, and I chose duplicate, edit, duplicate, and then it created a star. Now, once you do that, you can continue to push Control D, right? But basically, you want to end up with 7 different stars. So now you'll notice I have 7 different stars. After you paste each one of them, you'll have to move them because otherwise they'll paste on top of one another because you want to be able to access them separately. But you'll notice that after you have put the twinkle there, all of them have the wobble effect, right? And then the zooming out, right? So you've got the blur effect as well as the wobble effect. All right, with all 7 stars selected, all right, and I use a shift select, so I'll select the first star 1 and then hit shift, and then select star 7, and all of them pull up. I want to choose R, right, and what that's going to do is that's going to bring up the rotation, and so it brings up the R, and then the Shift S should fill up scale. Interesting. It's not actually doing that on mine. Very interesting. So let's take a look. Apparently, I had to be a bit more strong with my letter pushes, because it worked when I just pushed the R and the Shift S again. But basically it pulls up the scale and rotation for each particular star itself. So now I can scroll through, I can modify if you want to see all stars at the same time. You can also change the size of this to make it easier for you to modify and or play with those values. Okay, so what I did for each one of these is I changed their scale and rotation, right? So I still have 7 stars. I changed it by 10. So I changed and you can change it by whatever values you want. So if you want to change it, I did 10 all the way 90 down to 30. And then for the rotation, I added 10 degrees or whatever. So now they're all variable star lengths or sizes, I guess. And then, of course, if I move these, because I still have that opacity, right? So now they're, right? So now it's rendering on the first time, so it looks kind of weird. But they basically disappear, right? So now if I wanted to run through this, I could click on my spacebar, play it, and then they're going to move or blur between sections, right? So. Alright, so now that I've got my stars established, let's move on. So I went to the preview option and I played it so it can render all the frames. And you'll give you an idea here. You'll see, if you look real close, you can see kind of a warble. That's our wobble to our stars as we go through. And we can see each one of them kind of move or wobble independently as they go through. So you've got all 7. So you got all 7 stars, and they move around in different locations. Well, not move around, but they wobble at different levels, and then eventually fade out. Okay, so what I did was I moved all my stars around. I had some stars on top of the tree, which didn't make a lot of sense unless we were dealing with a shooting star situation, in which case the tree would be probably on fire or destroyed. So I moved it out where I can see them all pretty readily, right? And then what I want to do is I want to click on each one of them using, my Shift key. I can just select them all. And then I want to choose a layer, and I want to choose pre-compose. And then I'm going to call this layer Starscape, right? Okay, Starscape. And then I want to choose the move all attributes into new composition. Move all attributes into new composition. I want to push OK. And then what it does is actually collapses all those particular stars into a composition called Starscape. So if I wanted to modify that, I can just go to the composition Starscape, right? And then I can modify the individual Starscape. So that actually moves them between the two and allows me to modify them appropriately. Also make sure to save your compositions as you go along, so that way if something fails, you don't lose them all, because that would be sad. Next thing I want to do is I want to make sure I have no layers selected, so I make sure I click down here, so I've selected any layers or not selected layers. I then want to move it to 110, so I want to move it to 110, and then after 110 is selected, you'll notice that you have the pen tool up here. So I want to make sure to choose the pen tool, which is a keyboard shortcut of G, and we'll go ahead and get started with that momentarily. With the pen selected, and the reason I don't have any other layers selected is when I'm going to draw my next shape, what's going to happen is it's going to create its own layer. And what we're going to create is we're going to create the base flower pot layer, which is basically kind of a rectangle that's skinnier on the bottom, right? So I just left click here, I draw it maybe this way, and then here. Interesting. Let's undo that real quick, because that's not working out the way I wanted that to do. So let's start again. Okay, so after practicing my drawing techniques, it is not a left click and drag, it is simply a click, and it draws the line or connects lines between it. So, and these are called vertexes. So I add my initial vertex, which is click, and then another one, click, and you'll notice it makes a line. And then when I add another, click, and it fills it in, and then further another, click, it'll actually fill it in. You'll notice that it has something similar to a kind of the plot where that's concerned. I can now change, here we go. I can now just change it to here. Now I can modify the size.